Okay?
Okay. I'm a little bit animated the other way.
Good. It's your shot at Hollywood, David. Our interview this morning is with David Buffington. David was born in Port Arthur, Texas, November of 1934. He served in, and he is retired military from the United States Air Force. He served from July of 1954 until July of 1975. His highest rank attained was Master Sergeant E7. This interview is conducted at Burleson, Texas on Friday, January the 28th, 2011. My name is Dale Dexheimer. I'm not related to Mr. Buffington in any way. Also in the room we have Milton Gibson and Gary Burton, who are our videographers. This interview is conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress and also for Operation Remember, City of Burleson, Texas. And with that little introduction, David, you can tell us your story of your time in the United States Air Force, sir.
Well, a good piece of it I'll remember because I've got it written down in front of me. And I went as far as that I could. Well, I'll start out by telling that after I had graduated in 1954 from high school, I looked around for a job and I was able to get a job in construction. The problem with construction is that you start in and you're working, and then when the job runs out, you look for another job. At this time, I had ran out of a job and I didn't have nothing going for me. And I was staring the draft wet square dab in the face. And my brother, Charles, which is my oldest brother, was in the Army at that time. Now, my next older brother, Alvin, he was in the reserve, so he was safe. I was in the reserve, the Navy Reserve, but I found out through that I did not like it. I said, I don't want to go Navy. Charles says, whatever you do, don't go Army. He says, everywhere I have been, those guys in the Air Force, they always had it made. And so he says, go Air Force. I said, yeah, but that's 4 years instead of 2 or 3 years. 3 years Navy, 2 years Army. And he says, it's well worth it. Go Air Force. Well, so that, he was my big brother, So I went with his advice. And my girl, we wanted to get married. And the reason we held off getting married, I didn't have a job. So we sat down and we discussed it, and we decided that we found out that people married in the military had a little better deal of it than those that were not married. Don't mind me looking at you guys, do you? So I'll have somebody to look at in the room. And so we did. We had this big, huge wedding. There was myself, and of course Jackie, my wife, the person I'm getting married. There was my good buddy. He was going to be my best man. There was the preacher and his wife, and that was it. That was the one who was the president at my wedding. So I had this huge wedding. We went way out into the country, and he was an old-time preacher, a little bitty church. We got married. Okay, so I'm getting ready to go into the military. We had I think it was 1 or 2 days that we had of time, when you get married. And off I went to the military. Went to Houston, Texas. There I went through the, all the things that they do, and they punch you in your arm and all that other stuff, to find out if they want you. They look in one ear and then the other ear and see if they can see each other, that sort of thing, But I went off to San Antonio, Texas. At San Antonio, Texas, there I went through basic training. Jackie came to see me one time. We got a little break in our training. Jackie came to see me, and we spent a little bit of time. I had a good buddy, and that's important, what I'm mentioning to you. I had a good buddy that we kind of teamed up with one another, and we spent our time together. Okay, so Jackie, of course, Jackie went back home. And I got a job. I decided I wanted to stay there, so I got a job as a tactical instructor. And this is where you march the troops all over the place and take them to classrooms, and you teach them all this military stuff, you know. Same thing I had just got through. So I became. And at that time, well, we were pretty well safe, so Jackie became pregnant, and we stayed there long enough that my daughter was born. So my daughter Marie was born at that time, so now I'm a family man. And but however, my instructor job did not work out so well. And they fired me. I mean, they just outright fired me because they said, you're just not instructor material. You just don't march troops and whatever so good. So they made me a flunky. Can you imagine becoming a flunky? Me and my one stripe. And so I was a flunky on the base, and I was stuck there for a while. And finally, the inspector general came through and said, you got to get rid of all your flunkies. So I got an assignment. I went to Chinook Field in Illinois, and I was heading through a course called reciprocating engines. Now, when I mention these, they're important. I want you to know they had a lot to do with my entire life. So I went through school, through Chinook Field, brought Jackie up, and we lived in this scroungy little bitty apartment. I tell you, it's just terrible the way they treated military people. Some of them lived in things that was converted chicken coops. I lucked out and met this old couple, very sweet old couple, and I lived in an upstairs 2-bedroom area up there. So I lucked out in that area while I was in Chinook Field. Drove my car back and forth, snow on the ground, didn't have a heater in the car, you know, just a wonderful experience. Me and my one stripe. And there came all of a sudden out of the clear blue sky, there came this great need for engine mechanics. And that's what I was doing. I was going through engine mechanics. It was reciprocating engines. If you don't know what a reciprocating engine, they have these big heads up on the engine. And it was drove, well, the best way to remember, let me put it this way. Best way to remember, they were driven by propellers. Of course, that wouldn't work today because of the other type of engines that they have. So anyway, I became a reciprocating engine, and they had a great need. So, and guess what they needed them? They needed them all in foreign countries. I had not planned on going to a foreign country. At the end of my training, Japan. So it looked like I was going to go to Japan. So I left Jackie at home with the parents, and I took off and went to Japan with my one stripe. And that's the reason why I emphasize that, by the way, with my one stripe to Japan. Well, almost 2 years now have passed by. And remember that buddy I told you in? I got in touch with him. He had left there, went to school not far from where we were at. He was now with 3 stripes. And I'm still sitting with my one stripe. He got out with his 3 stripes at the end of his tour, of course. But I went off to Japan. And I did figure out a way to get Jackie over, but I had to pay for her flight over, and I had to pay for us a place to live. So we bought into a little bitty 2-room thing that the Japanese built to take advantage of all the military people. Now, the one thing the military did do, they give us furniture, and so we didn't have to worry about furniture. But I had things like, how about a stove? All we had was one of those heating things, and we had a hot plate for a stove. And that was all of our appliances that we had. I said, they got it backwards, you know. All of us poor folks, they ought to give us authorization to pay for our wives to come over, but you had to be higher in ranks in order to have your wife and what have you sent overseas. Well, anyway, where was I? Finally, while I was there, I was now 2 stripes. Boy, I'm really moving up in the world. We had the aircraft there that we had was called a Dumbo, and there was a reason for it because it looked like a Dumbo. But the good thing about it landed on land, it also landed in water. I went with one flight with them, and that was my last time to ever go with them because, boy, I tell you, hitting that water, and the water would come inside the aircraft with you. And I said, no, thank you. So I just stuck to working on the aircraft while they was on the ground. By the way, I was also an engine mechanic for our helicopters. This was an air rescue unit because we was right next to the water there. And if you got caught in the water, you didn't live very long because you'd freeze to death. Let's see. Our motto was, so others may live. And I was very proud of that motto, and I was very proud of the job that I did to be a part of a unit like that. The military has a tendency to build pride in one. And since then I've said that I think that everyone should be required to spend at least 2 years in the military. Because it changed a lot of my attitude and what have you towards my country, the whole thing. Even though I'm telling you about these bad experiences, overall it was a good experience being in the military. But I wanted out, so finally about 18 months went by, and my 4 years was up, and we packed up and went back home. We didn't send. No, I'm with 2 stripes. Got out 4 years, 2 stripes. I thought of my buddy. He got out with his 3 stripes, and I was so jealous of him. So I got out of the service, and the thing I didn't know was there was no jobs. I mean, there was flat no jobs. Grown men was fighting over jobs bagging groceries at the grocery stores and what have you. Well, I lucked out, and I had a cousin who was in business, and he says, David, tell you what, I'll hire you, but not just right now. And I said, but what he didn't understand was, I need a job right now. Now, we got what they call mustering out pay. And that money was running out. And we lived in a little hole in the wall. Jackie and I did. We just didn't have much of anything. So Jackie and I sat down and we discussed it. And I said, I hate this, but, you know, the only thing open to us is to go back in. Now, one of the incentives, they did have a re-enlistment pay that they paid you. And then, back then, that was a huge amount of money as far as I was concerned. So we went back in, and they sent me to El Paso, Texas. I went under B-36s. I remember I'm an engine mechanic. Went to B-36s. But the thing they didn't tell me was they were phasing the B-36s out. By the way, I worked on the very last B-36 to fly. They told us it was going to be the last this aircraft, and they were going to take it someplace and put it on display. But I got the distinction of saying I worked on that airplane. That was the last airplane to go out. Well, now they sent me to school. I had to go to aircraft school, jet engine aircraft with bombers. I went to the B-52D. Now, D is important because each model B-52 was different. The B-52D, the gunner, sat all the way in the very back of the tail. So I had to learn all about, from one end of the aircraft back and forth, about how this aircraft worked. I was no longer an engine mechanic now. I am an aircraft mechanic. So I'm responsible for the entire aircraft. If I need anything specific like engines or electronics or whatever, you call and job control and say, I need so-and-so, and they send you out a specialist to take care of them. They were very specialized. When we had to move from El Paso, Texas, I got transferred to Niceville, Florida. Now, during that time, if you drove through Niceville, you probably didn't even realize you had drove through a town. They didn't even have curbs along the streets and what have you. And that's another important point you'll see coming up here in a moment. I bought this trailer to haul my stuff in now, because remember, I'm still sitting with 2 stripes. And they're also not authorized any transferring. And so this guy says, I got a trailer that I'll sell you. And I forgot, he named a pretty cheap price. And I said, well, that sounds good. That's better than renting. But the thing was, he hadn't finished putting it together. And so I went up to the hobby shop. We went up there, and he finished welding the thing together. Then I had to build a bed and put on it to haul my stuff on. And guess what? We started out down the road, and the trailer would do this. It would move over, and then it'd come back. It'd move over, and then come back. Well, if you know anything about mechanics, you know what happened. He had welded the frame on crooked. And so now the trailer wanted to go one direction, and I wanted to go another direction. We wore out a set of tires, and like it wore us out while it was at it, going down the road with that trailer shifting back and forth all the way to Florida. Well, we found another little hole in the wall to live in, and, just about that time, I was getting tired of living in holes in the walls, but my problem was I had, guess what? Still had those 2 stripes. Let's see. Let me look at my notes again. We made so little money. We just couldn't change our situation. We had spent my re-enlistment bonus on a nice car, so we decided we'd like to have a place to live more than a nice car. So I talked to my boss on the flight line, and he said he knew a guy who wanted a trailer like you've got. So I told the guy the problem is, he said, well, I'm going to be towing it real slow wherever I go, and that's exactly what I want. I said, well, all I've got is my brand new Chevrolet. He said, I'll tell you what I'll do. He said, I've got this old Pontiac out here, and I'll trade you out and consider your bill completely paid. So at the time, so away went my beautiful little car. And it's so hard to do. It was the nicest car. But anyway, I had this old Pontiac now, but we bought us paid down on a nice little trailer. For once in our life, we had a beautiful place to live. It was little, but it was all brand new inside, and it was a wonderful little trailer. And so we went and we put that on a trailer park. In the trailer park, being in the military, and that's another good thing about being in the military. You always have friends in the military. I can go in and I can sit down, and if the guy's a military guy, we'll strike up the conversation and we'll just talk up a storm, because there's something like, I hate to say it this way, a brotherhood, or what do you want to, with military people. And I don't know about the younger generation, but that's the way it was during my time. And of course, you had your jerks. Always have that, you know. But for the most part, military people helped out other military people. If you got in problems, you just pick up the phone and call, and those guys said, well, let me see what I can do. Or they knew somebody that could do something. And so I wanted to throw that in about the military, because I'll tell you about the bad things too as well. We, let's see. Okay, I'm in Niceville, Florida, right? About the trailer. Wore out the tires, okay. We're now got us a nice place to live. Old car. Boy, as long as you treated it like a baby and didn't drive it too fast, it was doing okay. So there were some of us got together and said, hey, why don't we move out of this trailer park? They got some lots for sale way out here in the woods. And they did. It was a little ways out of town. And this is the interesting thing. We said, yeah, let's do that. And so, but problem is, my credit was, I mean, it was like, it was all stretched as far as it would go. And my daddy had drilled into us, pay for what you get. Don't start getting yourself overloaded with credit that you can't pay for. So I was maxed out for what I could pay for. And but the three of us got together. One of the guys' daddies loaned us the money, and we bought the lot. So we went out there and we borrowed some tools. We cleared off enough of the trees so we could get the trailers in, and we did. And we went out there and we dug the trenches for the water lines, and we dug the trenches for the sewer lines, and then we dug the septic tank. Now understand, this is sandy soil. Do you know how many times we dug that septic tank? We would dig that septic tank, and the side of the wall would cry. So we'd dig it again. By the way, we're digging this by hand. And we dug and we redug. And before we got the walls up, I bet we redug that septic tank at least 5 or 6 times. But we're three young guys, you know. Just, by the way, it was the middle of the winter too, but not too bad in Florida. Let's see. Okay, and we finally got it dug, and we did a great job. We really did. Put in all the water lines and what have you. And one of the guys was an electrician, and he he appropriated some switches, multiple switches, put one on each trailer, and he wired it, and we put up lights in the front of the lot, and you could go to any one of our trailers and you could flip the switch and it turned on the light out front, and anybody else could turn it back off again. Life was good at that time. I drove back and forth. I even had me a dog, which I really liked. And the three of us did all right. But a little trouble developed. One of the guys just didn't disagree with our original agreement. He didn't think it was right. And he became pretty upset about it and what have you. And so the other two of us was okay. And we said, tell you what, we'll chip in and we'll buy your part of the lot out if you're that unhappy about it. So we helped him move out, move back to the trailer park, parted in good friends and all like that. And now the two of us own the lot. Well, 5 years went by. And during that time, I decided I didn't particularly care for my job. One day, I was over at headquarters. And I was over there, and I was all bundled up like this. And I watched this guy get out of his car. He was in regular light uniform, short sleeves, and ran into the building. And I said, man, he's going to freeze his tail off if he don't watch it. I went in there, and he was one of the office people. And I said, how does a guy get a job like that? Well, this was a very important point in turning in my life. I didn't know it at the time, but it was a very important point in turning. So I went over and I said, how does somebody get a job over here like this? And they said, well, the only place for your particular career, my particular career, he said, you have to work in that office right over there. And so I went over there, and they said, well, as a matter of fact, the guy with your rank, your particular field, is fixing to retire. Would you be interested in coming to work over here? And I said, yes, I might be. And inside me, I was saying, yes, 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 yes. You know, I thought of all the cold weather and whatever, and the rain and whatever. And so the guy in charge, he talked to me a while, and he says, I'm going to get you transferred over here. And you learn the ropes of how we do things over here and that. And I said, yes, sir, that would be fine with me. And inside I was saying, yay! So anyway, I did. I got transferred over there and learned the training. And what I did was I debriefed pilots. When they would come in off of a flight, they would land, and then they would come over to us, and they would all come into one room, and I was the head person. In there, I also had all my specialists. And when they got through, all the specialists would turn their paperwork into me. This was what needs to be done, and the pilot would tell me. And it was just terrific. It was just great, interesting as to what was going on. And then I would go, and I would schedule all these people to come in to get the aircraft fixed. Also, all flights and everything they flew out, they would send me a schedule, said these flights, this is when they're going to go, and all this sort of thing. And I knew there was a certain amount of maintenance that had to be done. And I was doing all that. And I really thoroughly enjoyed it. And so while I was there, I got my third stripe. And so things were just a little bit better. Now, spent my time there, and by now I'm spending about 5 years on this base in Florida. I'm perfectly happy where I'm at. Making the third stripe made it a little easier financially. And then one day a guy comes in and informs me something that scared the heck out of me. He said, Buffington, how would you like to have $1,000? I said, well, yeah. He says, I've got an assignment. I'm number one and you're number two. He says, it's Minot. If anybody knows anything about Minot, it's as far north as you can get. And they snow in about half the time and what have you. And I thought to myself, no way do I ever want to go to Minot. I don't care if you gave me $5,000 or what have you. He said, I'd be willing to give you $1,000. I thought, boy, that wouldn't even be a drop in the bucket. I said, no. And so I knew that when he shipped out, guess who's number one now? So I went to personnel and I asked them, I says, when a person's been on the base for 5 years, aren't they authorized to put in for a shipment? They said, yes. Where you want to go? I said, where you want to go? Great. How about that? I said, I want to go to Texas. So he said, okay, we'll put you down for Texas. So he did. He put me down for Burleson Air Force Base, Texas. And and sure enough, guess what? I got the assignment. I was so relieved. By the way, I'm still not authorized, so I had to pay to have my trailer towed to Texas. And by the way, by the end, we had traded it up in the size of our trailer. So, but anyway, away we went to Texas. And there they put me back to crew chiefing, back out on the line again and this sort of thing. I'd have to go on to alert And by the way, everybody who went to alert, you just moved into the base where they had a building out there for you to stay. You had to be there around the clock because anytime that horn, or klaxon we called it, went off, that meant, those aircraft had to be off the ground immediately. And that means we'd have to run out the door and get out there and they would crank all the engines up. They had these things that was about that big around, and it fit onto the engine. And what the pilot would do, he would fire that thing. First I'd get out in front and give him clearance. He would fire that thing. That thing would start to burning, and it put out a tremendous amount of pressure. And when it did, it would go against the blades on the inside of the engine and cause it to start to spinning. And when it got to spinning up to speed with this little pod, I forgot what we called it, they could start the engines. And they would start all the engines, they would run them, and then finally they would cancel the alert. Guess who had all the work then? I had to open the cowling on the aircraft and put another one of those things up inside and what have you. And anyway, that was my job. And I got to know a guy in the training section, by the way. And finally, I got off the line and became the squadron training. And then finally, I became the wing training. I told you that this was important. And then I found out an outfit. Let me see what I'm saying over here. Meanwhile, they shipped all of our people, half of our people, to California because they knew they was fixing to close this base down. They sent them off to California, and then they changed their mind and decided to wait a while. The problem was half the people were in California, the other half were still here maintaining a flying schedule. So David went on 7 days a week. I never got a day off. That lasted for almost a year. By the way, they have regs against doing that now. They won't allow that because they just worked my tail end off. How'd you like to have a job where you work 7 days a week? I still getting that same pay, 3 stripes. So they came and they shipped the airplanes out. And I didn't want to leave because I was perfectly happy where I was at. So I inquired around if there was a job that I could get into and stay. And they said, yes, we need some people to be ground crew for the president of the United States I'm talking about. And they would be assigned to what we call transit maintenance. Now, transit maintenance, what they did is they took care of all the airplanes that would just fly in, stay temporarily, and then leave. You will be assigned to transit maintenance, but mainly you will become a part of the president's team. But you had to pass the test. And the test was to get a clearance. They called it top drawer. Now, top drawer was the same thing as saying top secret. No difference. In other words, you were authorized to work around the president. And I thought, that sounds pretty important. So here I got the clearance. They even gave us uniforms, white uniforms, coveralls and what have you. They did all the laundry on them, what have you. All I had to do was come to work and put them on. And anytime the president, by the way, was Lyndon Baines Johnson at that time. Anytime he was coming in, we was immediately alerted, and we had to be there. We took care of his airplane. I got to know the crew chief that took care of the airplane. Heard a lot of interesting stories. By the way, did y'all know that Johnson was a drunk? I bet 3 men in their room did not know that. Did you? Nobody else did either. He told me, he says, he had a complete bar set up in the aircraft. By the way, I got to fly on that aircraft one time. They had some maintenance due on it. They had to go to test hop. He came out and he said, "Hey, Buff, would you like to go fly on the Air Force One?" I said, "Well, man, would I?" You bet. And he gave us some cigarettes and all kinds of things that said Air Force One on it. And he told us a lot of interesting stories. He said, at Washington, there was 2 places the aircraft would land. If it landed way out at the end of the runway, they knew Johnson was drunk. And they'd send car out there and whatever, get him, carry him right straight to the White House. If it came in and taxied all the way in, then they knew Johnson wasn't drunk. Little, I don't know if y'all want, is that part of my story?
Your story.
Oh, he told us story after story. And this is the crew chief on Air Force One. So I know he wasn't elaborating. I knew one thing, that he was a cussing president. I know that. They came up and they needed somebody with a clearance to go out to his ranch. Now that's pretty interesting. The ground power man, he had a clearance. So him and I teamed up together, and we would drive out to his ranch and take care of the ground power out there, because they had a little small 4-engine aircraft that flew from our base out to the ranch. And then that would take off and come back to Burleson, and he would leave from there. What else have I got on here? Oh, one night I got a phone call about 8 o'clock. And they said, "You're needed over at the ground power place." I said, "Okay." So I got into my, by my way, civilian clothes. We had to wear civilian clothes. I go over to the motor pool, and tell you how stupid some things are. And I had the truck that we took, I had to tape off where it said U.S. Air Force. I had to put tape over the top. Everybody knew. I mean, everybody and his brother and dog knew what those were Air Force trucks, and they were being used for the president. And so I said, "What's up?" And my buddy, I can't remember his name. You'd think you wouldn't need that. I'll call him my buddy. How's that? My buddy, he says, "We have to take a ground power unit out to the president's ranch, and they want it out there before tomorrow morning. It seems that in his bubble swimming pool, that water condensation is gathering up here at the top." This is, by the way, a very important item. "And it would drip and fall on his bald head." And that's what it was about. So how we drove with a power unit to dry it out in there, and in the middle of the night, and it had been raining. They had been doing some excavating and what have you, and mud, golly, we was almost in mud up to our knees. And then we got word, they said that the colonel wants to see you when you're through. And we thought, "What colonel are you talking about?" He said, "He's the lead Air Force One pilot. He is also the aide to the president." Usually those are 2 different jobs, but he was also the aide to the president, and said he wants to see you. And we thought, "Oh, now what are we going to get into?" So we went over there with us covered with mud to his quarters on the ranch, and he said, "Don't worry about that, guys. Come on in." He's just as friendly as he could be. "How you been doing?" Asked us who he was married, and I mean, just shot the breeze, asked us how things was going, and both of us was so tired. By now, we're talking about, it's about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. And in a little while, he talked on and on and on about, he talked about his married life, his family, what it was like to work for the president, told us stories about the president, what have you, and which were kind of interesting. But I was also very tired. I wanted to go home. And we weren't no trouble at all. He was just lonely. He wanted somebody to talk to. This is really weird. Y'all gonna think some of this is not true, but it is. It's true. He told us several stories about it, but I want to save time for this. First of all, he said the magic words. He said, and by the way, if you guys need anything whatsoever, you just let me know, and I'll see that you get it. I went like this. I said, as a matter of fact, I said, I have a little problem getting a ground power unit, not a ground power unit, getting a truck or whatever vehicle I need from the motor pool. He said, you do? He picks up the phone. He says, give me the motor pool officer on the phone. I don't give a damn what time it is. Get me the motor pool officer on the phone. So we looked at one another, me and my buddy. He says, Major, he says, I've got one of the workers that works for me here in the room, and he tells me he has a little problem getting a vehicle. His name is David Buffington, and he says, from now on my word, I never want to hear this again. He says, I want you to see that he gets whatever vehicle, whenever he wants it, anytime he wants it. And I want to see that it's ready to go, and all he has to do is get in it and drive off. I thought, boy, ain't that great? Man, it's nice to have power. And he said, there's there anything else? So my buddy said, well, Colonel, there is something. He says, you see these stripes? He was a tech sergeant. He said, see these stripes? He says, I'm way over time and grade. And I think, and I don't know why I can't get promoted. He picks the phone up. He says, give me the personnel officer. And he puts it back down. About 15, 20 minutes later, the phone rang. He picked it up. He said, yes, Major. He told him who he was. And he says, I want, give me your name again, he said. And my buddy told him who he was. He says, I want you to go pull his records. I don't give a damn what time it is. He says, I want that and I want it now. I says, when you're in that position, I guess you can say that. And so he put the phone down, and within 30 minutes, he had a phone call, and that major had his records there. He said, why has this man not been promoted? He says, Major, I want you to personally see that something comes up to make sure this man gets in on the promotion board, and let him know that it is my desire that he gets promoted. And he put the phone back down. He says, is there anything else? Boy, I couldn't think of anything. I said, what else can I ask for? When you got the golden goose, what else do you do? We left there, and all of a sudden, we was wide awake. We weren't tired at all. And that's all we could talk about all the way back to Burleson off the ranch. Do you know what happened after that? I found out down the motor pool, my name was up on their bulletin board. And it had up there that I had top priority. And when I called down there, I even gave them by the number what vehicle I'd like to have. They would have it ready for me, washed and ready to go. And as far as, guess what happened next promotion? My buddy got promoted. And I didn't know it. I didn't have time to grade. And so next thing I know, I got promoted with my 4th stripe. So, you know, all this we had to put up with really began to pay off. Am I using up too much time?
No, sir.
So we felt like, you know, pretty good position. And that's the position that I stayed in the rest of the time. I saw President Johnson. He got out of office. You know, he quit his office and went out of it. And But I stayed in the transit maintenance. Well, I was up there in transit maintenance for a certain length of time. And by the way, there is a period of time when you get promoted this time before you can get promoted to the next time. So the promotion came around that that I had time and grade. I didn't even pay any attention to promotion. I mean, I just barely made time and grade. And I went to what they call commander's call. This was one thing you had to go to. And the guy told me, sit down next to me, he says, I guess you're pretty happy about making tech sergeant. And I said, what are you telling me? I didn't make no tech sergeant. He said, yep. He said, I work in the ordnance room and I saw your name on the promotion. I said, that just can't be. So that's all I could think. I never heard another word that was mentioned in the commander's call. So I went out, called for one of the trucks from transit maintenance to come get me. I was in charge, by the way. And I was driving around. That's all I could think about. One of the aircrafts came in, and I told the guy that was riding with me, I said, I want you to go out and catch the aircraft and bring it in. And we took our little follow-me trucks out, and the aircraft had to follow us in, see. And it was a small airplane, so I wasn't concerned. I said, I want you to take me to the ordnance room. So I went to the ordnance room, and I marched through the door, ready to say, do you have the promotion list? The guy said, yes, you did make tech sergeant. I said, I got to see it in writing. So he brought me the list. There were big deal. There was Buffington on there, big as life. You know, I was only in Buffington outfit. So here I had made another stripe. I said, man, this is great. I remained in until that outfit, I was no longer eligible to be there anymore because they didn't have airplanes, you know, for us. So the next place that if you wanted to, I was there 5 years, so I went in for a 5 years transfer. And I said, don't you have a deal by which you had to go north-south and south-north? If you're up north, you can ask for one south. If you're down south, you can ask for one up north. And then the guy said, yes, that's the way the regs read. I said, well, I want to put in for north. I'm at Burleson Air Force Base now, mind you. I said, I want to go to Carswell Air Force Base in Fort Worth. And the guy says, that's not a north assignment. I said, put me in. And I put in, and they couldn't hardly believe it when it came in approved that I got a transfer to here. Well, my problem here, when I got here, I was not eligible on the aircraft that they had. And so I had to go back to school again. The school was right on the base, on Carswell. And so I went over there and went through the classes and got qualified on the B-52G and went out on the line again and got stuck out there, of course, and, you know, doing all the things that they do. And let's see, make sure I covered all my notes. Okay. And all the things that they have to do. And so back into it again, going out on alert and all that sort of thing, whatever. So I got to looking around for another training job to get off of this line because of my back experience that I had in training. So I went up to the squadron training, and lo and behold, the guy was fixing to leave that had my particular career. And so I went over to the order room and said I'd like to have that job. Well, nobody knew about these things, see? So nobody ever applied for them except me. And I got pulled off the line and went into the training section. Well, it was due to my job in the training section that I had to do business with also the same outfit that I went through, you know, to learn about the aircraft that was there on the base. And there was an outfit called FTD, Field Training Detachment. And I got to know the guys over there, going back and forth, you know, with their training requirements, whatever. And found out that the instructor that I had gone through classes with, what have you, was fixing to retire. And I asked him, I said, what can I do to get you a job over here? He said, well, you go to personnel and put in for it. That's what you do. Nobody else knew about him fixing to retire. So when I put my name in for it, nobody else put in for it. So lo and behold, I went over there and I had the captain was in charge of the outfit. He interviewed me, and for some reason or other, he liked me, and I got the job. Well, I just barely got transferred over there, and they said, you got to go to school. So back to school again. And they sent me to Chinook Field. At Chinook Field, I spent about 3 weeks. Now, here was the interesting part of that. Of course, what I learned was all about classrooms. What do you do in the classroom, how to do it, lesson planning, and I didn't learn about the aircraft. What I did is learn nothing but how to run a classroom, and which turned, by the way, paid off for the rest of my life. It did, my training. I went to college when I got out. I know you sound like I'm skipping, but I'm really not. When I got out of the military, I was going to college at that time, taking classes, and I finished up my classes, got a degree, and went into public school teaching. And that teaching, that 3-week class, boy, it paid off, because they teach you zero about how to run a class, how to do lesson plans and all that. They don't teach you any of that in college. But I learned it all right there in the military. I remember that my principal, after my first year, he had to give you an evaluation. He called me in. He says, Mr. Buffington, look like you're doing well. He said, but I expected you to. You coming out of the military. See the respect that some of them have for the military? I might sound like a campaign poster here or something other. But the good part, I can't overemphasize the military. The guy, and that was his word. And he had very little to say, and I was out. And I was approved, and I ended up in teaching. And by the way, I retired out of teaching, public school teaching. And a lot of it was due to the military, these schools that I keep telling you about, that I went to. Let me catch up. I got my north-south, and but with the rank that I had, by the way, I now at last had for my family and goods and whatever, but now that I needed it so bad, I didn't need it. I sold my trailer there in Austin. I sold my trailer, and the company, I bought a trailer from them. And they said that they would deliver it. And, well, they really didn't deliver it. What they did is they took one of their trailers that was already there, and they went to the trailer park where I was going, and they set it up and had it all ready. When I showed up, even the air conditioning was running when we showed up there. And a few days later, another truck showed up with all of our stuff and unloaded it there. Well, I am now at Carswell Air Force Base. We're in our brand new trailer, and I really liked it. As soon as they found out that I had experience in training, I I ended up, and I was able to go to FTD. And they sent me to, like I said, sent me to that school, and I learned all that. I stayed, by the way, with three Iranians. Yeah, Iranians. I know that I'd get a surprised look off you. 3 kids. And it was my job, of all things, why I had to look after them, these 3 kids. And they let the 3 kids know that I was the one in charge of that. There was 4 of us in a room, and that I was in charge. And that they better not hear anything bad back from me about them. Well, one of them was a weirdo, but the other 2 kids, I tell you what, you couldn't ask for nicer kids to be around. They constantly asked me to go with them. These young snot noses always asked me to go with them. And when I did, they paid for everything. You know, the Iranian paid them. Oh, man, it was unreal how much money they got. Well, this one guy, he was different. He also didn't know how to take a bath. And his area stunk. One day I told him, I said, you're going to have to clean your act up. And I laid the law down to him. He went to the shower, and I think he stayed in the shower for around about an hour. I'm telling you the truth. And he sang the whole time he was in there. And he washed, and he washed, and he washed, and he sang. And it was hilarious what this guy was. And I said, well, whatever, he's getting cleaned up, that's for sure. But the other 2 kids, I went out with them several times, and they had to pay for everything. They paid for the restaurant. We went to the movie. They had to pay for the movie, and I couldn't pay for anything. But then, of course, I came back to Carswell, and that was the hardest part because I had to write the guy before me, he was terrible about lesson plans. And so I took all that training that I had when I went to school, and I made up all brand new lesson plans for the course. And I had so much to do, I stayed ahead of the kids. By the way they did that was in blocks. And each block, they had a different instructor. I had 3 blocks that I taught. I taught aircraft in general. What did I teach? The ejection seats, I taught that. And there was something else I taught. I forgot what it was. Anyway, I taught three of the slots. And I was just barely ahead of the kids. In fact, there was one night, I had stayed up that night and wrote my lesson plans because it was for the next day. And so I had all my lesson plans wrote up for this block. And I went through my lesson plans, and I was finished before that time was over. And I didn't have any more material. And boy, I was really jammed then. And so I went to one of the instructors and told him what I did. And he said, okay, Buffington. He said, I'll come in there. He went in there, he told a bunch of stories and a lot of filthy jokes and what have you. And the kids just loved him. And as time went on, they had a block of instruction for air crews. I said, what am I going to teach air crews? And the first group of air crews, they came in, and I thought, what am I going to teach them? And out of my mouth, all of a sudden, I asked them, have y'all had any problems lately? Lo and behold, they started talking about an area that I was thoroughly familiar with, but they were not. And so I began to teach them, and I got them to, and I said, there's the key. I'll get them to talk about their flights. Because they didn't want to be there in the first place, by the way. I had this one lieutenant colonel come in. He said, Sergeant, do your thing, whatever you need, and don't bother me. And boy, he went over and kind of like turned around, put his nose in the corner, and puffed up, you know. He was required, by the way, to be there. I thought to myself, okay, Colonel, go over there and puff up all you want to. I'll talk to these young crew people. So I asked one of them, I said, let me give you a situation on your aircraft. I had, by the way, a big board over here that had the complete fuel system of the aircraft on it. And every time you flipped the switch, it would light up lights on that thing and show you how the fuel was flowing through the aircraft for every valve and everything else that was on that airplane. And I asked him a question. I says, you're going to fly over to Okinawa. We have B-52s there. And you've passed the point of no return. And I said, you can't get any fuel out of this fuel tank right over here. Now your aircraft is beginning to do this. And I said, what do you do in a case like that? And those kids, they got up there. I said, here's the board. Show me what it is that you would do. And they got over and they looked and they looked and looked and looked. And finally this colonel jumped up. You bunch of stupid idiots. Here's what you do. And he got over there and I went and sat down. And he says, you pull this circuit breaker over here and you know, and he showed them how to route the fuel around where it would get to the right point. And he went on to tell these bunch of stupid idiots. And I didn't say another word for that entire class. When he got through, the colonel come over and shake my hand and said, pretty good class there, Sergeant. Well, anyway, that's something else. Those are little side stories. We, the part that, another story about our president, by the way. Our president, we had firemen that lived out on the ranch all the time. The taxpayers don't know anything about this. They wore civilian clothes. They dug trenches. They had done everything in the world out on that ranch. Well, me and my buddy was out there one day, and we was, all of a sudden they said, clear the area. Clear the area. Clear the area. Just get away. And so we didn't know what to do. They said, see those buildings out there? You can go out there. The guys in the fire department got to telling us stories. They were also down there, by the way. They said, let me tell you some stories about our president. He said, let me give you an example. He said, we were having problems with the commode. It was plugged up. So we told the foreman of the ranch that we had in our house, we had a commode that's plugged up. Could we get somebody in to fix it? They heard this roaring noise. The president had this little buggy that he loved to drive. That thing shows up in front of their house. Out steps our president. Understand you boys are having some toilet problems. He goes in there and he looks, he said, yeah, I can see it's all plugged up. No problem, guys. He says, I'll see about getting it fixed. Meanwhile, they're sitting there like this. The President of the United States is coming in there to check up on a toilet. But that's what he did. He goes out, gets in his little buggy. By the way, have y'all ever heard about his driving? One of the security guards that also had a clearance, by the way, he lived next door to me. And he was telling me about some of the shenanigans he would pull. He says, I was in a chase car. And he says, forget it. He said, those cars that he's got, they will move. And he said, we tried to chase him, but he said, he was gone. And he was the one that was driving him. His driver would be sitting on the side, probably half scared to death. And he said, boy, it was nothing for him to do 100, 110, 100, and he said that was beyond our limits. We could not keep up with him. That's just another little thing about our president. that we had. But this kid, young kid now, mind you, he absolutely had no respect for our president whatsoever because of his shenanigans. He says he was on one of the radios where they were talking back and forth, and they were asking, had anybody been up on the back porch? And they said, no, not we know it, and about that time, on come the president. And he cussed those people out. He said, you're going to be surprised what it was about. Somebody had come up there with their muddy shoes and had tracked mud onto the back porch. And he cussed that bunch out for all they were worth. Well, needless to say, this young kid had absolutely no respect for our president whatsoever. This is Johnson I'm talking about. I was trying to think of some of the other stories. He was wanting to come in, and he says, I just want to come in 3 minutes. Well, I guess I'll get off my stories and tell you that the wife and I stayed in the Air Force, and I began to go to college and take up college classes. I went up to Washington State. I got out in Washington, got out of the military in Washington State, and due to me attending classes and what have you, I was able to go right straight in to the University of Illinois, and never went to the campus. Never, not once did I ever go to the campus. And I got a bachelor's degree from the Washington State. Became a school teacher, of all things. Another poor paying job. I'm not enough sure how much far you want me to go.
Go ahead.
And we had a very tough time of it. We lived on my retirement pay, but here's another good thing about the military. They paid us a subsistence allowance for me to go to school. As long as I attended school full time, I got a subsistence allowance, and it gave me enough money between my retirement and the subsistence allowance. They paid for all my books, the whole thing. They call that the GI Bill. Boy, I deserved it. I deserved every bit of it. Today, I have a great insurance with the military, and I deserve every bit. I paid the price. You heard me mention what all we had to go through in order to be able to live in the military. And now there's talk about them wanting us to start paying for it. I wish people knew about what we had to put up with and what today, the way they're treating our they say veterans, and veteran is true, but I am a retired military. I had to spend 20 years